And so I want to talk about this idea of community. And I'd like to propose and to suggest today that I think one of the keys to believing for more, again, to believe for more for not just for ourselves, but for our communities and for our world. If we're going to believe for more, if we're going to believe for more love and for more peace and for more justice and for more goodness and for more flourishing, right? If those are the things that we're believing for, if we're going to believe for more, it really requires that we actually stay in community. Especially if we want to believe for more for the long haul, right? And I was thinking about this. It's easy to believe for more for a short period of time, right? It's easy to believe for more when everything is going according to plan. But how do you continue to believe for more when we've got 344 more days in the year? When not everything goes according to plan. And I think community is one of those things. And so I titled this message today, and again, I want to try to be brief because I want to do some other things on the back end of this time that we have together. But I've titled this message today, More Together. Come on, turn to your neighbor right now and say, More Together. And again, I want to propose that if we're going to believe for more, we've got to do it together. In fact, go with me really quick. I want to show you something in Hebrews chapter 10. It's the same book of the Bible that our theme verse, Hebrews 11:1, which let me just repeat it for those of us who might have forgotten already. Hebrews 11:1, this has been our theme verse. It says, now faith, somebody say faith. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and the assurance about what we do not see, right? This is what we've been talking about, this idea of believing for more. Sometimes you can't, the reason why believing for more can be hard is because we see what's in front of us. We see the obstacle, we see the challenge, we see the opposition that's immediately in front of us. We can taste it, see it, feel it, touch it. But oftentimes you can't see what's around the corner. You can't see the opportunity or the possibility that's coming down the road. And so sometimes believing for more is hard, but it requires this thing called faith. It requires belief. It requires hope, to believe and to trust and to hope that more is still possible, even though you can't necessarily see it, touch it, or feel it right now in this moment. And Hebrews 10, which is literally just a chapter before, the author speaks of this idea of hope and belief and trust and faith. And I want to read just these 3 short verses for us today, and then make a few observations as it pertains to this idea of more together, this idea of being community. It says this, it says, let us hold, somebody say hold. Let us hold unswervingly. That just made me think of that rap song that just came out by, y'all know what I'm talking about? Oh, okay, never mind, Jada knows. I don't even know the name of the song, but it's about getting your swerve on, you know? All right. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised he is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds. Not giving up. Here's the key. Ready? Not giving up meeting together. Come on, say together, together. Together, 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 as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So Hebrews, quick context, Hebrews is an epistle. It's essentially like a letter, and no one really knows who the author or the authors are, but many believe that the context in which this letter was written was to these early Christians who were experiencing some persecution. So they're having some challenges in their faith, so much so that many were actually just giving up on faith. And so a lot of the Hebrews letter was to really encourage these early Christians to say, don't give up. I know it's hard. I know it's difficult. I know it's challenging, but don't give up. Don't lose hope. And so here's what we're seeing. This really is an invitation to hope, right? The invitation is what? This is an exhortation and it's encouragement for the early Christians in this particular region to continue to believe that more is possible, right? So that's why it says in Hebrews 10:23, what's the author saying? Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, right? It's really hard to believe for more. In fact, Hebrews 11 talks about this, right? That hope is essential to having faith, and faith is essential to believing for more. Now, you can kind of use all these words interchangeably, but I think hope is really at the core of what it means to be a person of faith, right? And to be a person that's actually believing that there is more that's actually possible. And what's so interesting about this is that the author says, I want you to hold on to hope, but I want you to hold on to hope unswervingly. What does unswervingly mean? Does anybody have any ideas? You don't swerve, right? When you're on the road, you stay straight and narrow. Unswervingly, I had to look it up because that word was too big. It was outside of my vocabulary. And so I had to look up unswervingly. But it's this idea of being consistent, steadfast, constant, right? So what the author is encouraging and exhorting these early Christians is, I want you to hold on to hope. I want you to keep believing for more, but I want you to hold on unswervingly. In other words, I want you to do this more than just a few days. I want you to believe for more than just your 21 days of fasting. It's easy to believe for more during our 21 days of fasting. When we're praying, we're fasting, we're starving ourselves, and all we're doing for 21 days is just thinking about God 24/7, because that's what we did, right? For those 21 days. It's easier to believe for more when you're in that state of mind and that state of being. And it's easy, might I suggest it's easier to believe for more when everything is going according to plan. But it's a lot harder, again, to believe for more when things are not going according to plan. Can I suggest, we're not that far into 2025, but I would imagine with even just a room of this size that some of us, if we were to look at this first month of January, there are probably already some things that didn't necessarily go according to plan. Can I get an amen? There were some things that happened that you did not expect. There were some things you wished would not happen that have actually happened. I mean, I don't know if you all are just following the news. I don't know if you're following along with the current administration. Like, I don't want to get political because we're in church, but let's just be honest. There's a lot of things happening right now with this current administration that they are doing that are in direct opposition to making progress, right? That are in direct opposition to the very things that we know are central to the core of the gospel message, right? Rolling back things like diversity, equity, inclusion, which might I add is not a woke thing, it's not a liberal thing, it's just a Jesus thing. But yet we see an administration that is at work to strike fear into the lives of so many marginalized communities, and we are literally only 2 weeks into this administration. And we've got 4 more. So I don't know about you, but like the past couple weeks, I'm like, I already feel exhausted, and I'm like, we're just getting started. How do you believe for more? How do you keep having some hope in the midst of all the things that are constantly around us and the news that we are being bombarded with on a consistent basis? But this is what Hebrews is saying. This is life. And not everything is going to go according to plan, and not everything is going to go your way. And so the key to believing for more is you've got to hold unswervingly to hope. You've got to be able to hope even when it doesn't even make sense to hope. Hope, can I suggest, is a very powerful thing. And if all else fails, I think it's the one thing that we need to continue to hold on to. In fact, there's, and by the way, you know, when I was just even sharing about some of the things that we're seeing in the news and the headlines, I think one of the things that's also just making it a little bit more real is that for some of us, it actually impacts our very lived experiences. And if it doesn't impact our very lived experience, it's impacting the very lived experiences of those that you know, whether it's family members, whether it's friends, whether it's community members. one of our community members, Sarah, reached out earlier this week, and she was like, I'm feeling all kinds of things, and I can't even imagine what our For Tomorrow community members are feeling. And I reached out to Monique, who's the director for Tomorrow, which serves a number of different communities and populations, but one of the larger populations that For Tomorrow serves is the Latino, Latinx community. And so I just checked in with Monique to ask how she's doing, and for the sake of confidentiality, I won't read and share what she shared, but the heart of it was that this has actually been really, really challenging. This has been really hard. There are programs that they offer that the funding has been frozen, so they're not able to actually do the things that they actually would normally do, but they're committed to still doing the work because they've got families and small businesses that they still support. There are families who are literally locking down. They're not going to their jobs right now because they're fearful. And because of that, now they're not able to pay their rent. They're not having their kids go to school right now because they're fearful of what's going to happen to them. And so now their kids are getting in trouble, and she's like, my question was, what can we do to help? And she was like, I really don't know. See, I think sometimes when we think about what's happening, when we realize that it actually has real implications, an impact on people around us that we know and that we say we care about, I think it brings on a very different meaning. And I think the reality of what's happening now is this is a very challenging time. In fact, it's not just the organization that we're partnered with here with our church, but there are organizations that are serving marginalized communities and underserved communities that are experiencing this in very real time. I'm on the email list for World Relief, which Sarah used to work for, and I know some of you are familiar with because we've done quite a bit of partnerships with World Relief in the past. They're probably one of the largest Christian organizations that is working with immigrant communities, refugees. And I received an email earlier this week from their executive director. And let me just read a quick portion of this, because I just want us to understand like the implications of, I think, what's happening around us. This is what the email that came in. It said, "Dear Changemakers, it's times like these that I'm so proud to be a part of such a caring network. I always strive to communicate honestly without exaggeration. While fundraising best practices suggest highlighting a need and making a call to action in every message, I find that approach insincere. It's not how I would speak to a trusted friend. I refuse to be the boy who cried wolf. So," and he goes on, "so with all the sincerity I can summon, believe me when I say this. This is the greatest crisis this office has ever faced." Keep in mind, World Relief has been around for 80 years. It was founded in 1944 in the aftermath of World War II. And the executive director of the Western region is saying this right now, this moment in time, because of what's happening in the administration, this moment in time, this is the greatest crisis this office has ever faced. It goes on, it says, "We're still figuring out what it means, and the situation changes by the hour. It may look different to you as you read it than when I wrote this, but here's what I know. Our services and our ability to support incoming participants, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, are being tested like never before." And then he goes on to list all of the different executive orders that have happened over the past week and a half that are affecting not just their organization, but the people that they're serving. So this is the challenge. This is where we're at. And I think in moments and times like this, it's easy to lose hope. It's easy to want to give up. It's easy to stop believing for more. But this is where hope becomes all the more powerful. In fact, Brian Stevenson, he's the founder and executive director of Equal Justice Initiative. I don't know if you're familiar with his work. It's an organization committed to ending mass incarceration, excessive punishment. They do a lot of advocacy work for those who have been wrongfully imprisoned. And he's also the author of a New York Times bestseller, Just Mercy, which they created a movie. How many of you all seen the movie Just Mercy that came out in 20? By the way, if you're looking, if you're a non-Black person looking to do some learning this month for Black History Month, this would be a great resource, is to get the movie. And I think it's probably free on one of the streaming platforms, but watch the movie Just Mercy. But this is what he says. He talks about this in regards to the power of hope. He says, "I am persuaded that hopelessness, listen to this, is the enemy of justice. I am persuaded that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. That if we allow ourselves to become hopeless, we actually become part of the problem. I think you're either hopeful or you're the problem. There's no neutral place. We've been dealing with injustice in so many places for so long, and if you try to dissect why it's still here, it's because people haven't had enough hope and confidence to believe that we can do something better. I think hope is our superpower. Hope is the thing that gets you to stand up when others say, sit down. It's the thing that gets you to speak when others say, be quiet. Nelson Mandela, South African anti-apartheid activist, civil rights activist, this is what he said when he was, some of you know, if you know his story, 27 years imprisoned, but played a significant role in the upending of apartheid in South Africa. He said this, remember that hope is a powerful weapon even when all else is lost. So obviously these are individuals that understand what it looks like to continue to believe and have hope even in the face of opposition, even in the face of injustice. And I think this is what Hebrews is speaking to. It's the same idea that we can't lose hope. We've got to keep believing. So of course this begs the question though, well, how then? How do we hold unswervingly to hope? Right? If this is so crucial and essential to our well-being and to the flourishing of our communities, how do we hold on to hope? And I think the key is in this next verse, in verse 23. It says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess. Watch what it says. It says, for he who promised is faithful. In other words, here's what we're believing. That what it is, and this is why we spent 21 days praying and fasting. Right? Because the idea was not just, let's just come up with a list of random things for us to hope for. Let's just come up with our Christmas list, wish list, right, that we can give to Santa Claus come December. No, that's not what we're doing. 21 days of prayer and fasting so that we could seek the heart of God to ask, God, what's on your heart? God, what is your design for humanity? What does it look like for your people to flourish? I want to understand that picture, and I want to get that vision because I want that to be the thing that I'm believing for myself and for my neighbors and for my community and for my world. And so what the author of Hebrews is reminding these individuals is that what you're hoping for, the reason why you could have confidence in that which you hope for is because that which you hope for is also what God desires and intends. So we're hopeful, we're able to hope even in the midst of opposition, even when it feels like we're failing, we're able to continue to still have hope because we believe in a God who has been faithful and continues to be faithful, and that the things that which we desire are the very things in which God desires. So if you all desire peace, can I guarantee you that your Creator desires more peace? If you are longing for justice and for freedom, can I suggest that God longs and desires for freedom and for justice as well? And that God ultimately is working sometimes behind the scenes. Sometimes I know it doesn't feel like there's not a whole lot going on. But I think the part of being able to hope for the long haul is that we have to believe and have a confidence that the things in which we are hoping for, God also is working towards. And then it goes on, it says in verse 24, it says this, and let us consider, here's then the key, okay? This is what I want to talk about as it pertains to our theme today. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So this is really what I want us to see, and this is really it. I want us to see the correlation and the connection, right? The author of Hebrews is saying, I want you to hold on to hope, and I want you to hold on to it unswervingly. Don't give up. I know it's hard. I know it's tough. I know the opposition is against you. I know that the odds are not in your favor. But I want you to hold on to this hope unswervingly, and here's how you're going to do it. Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up, meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other even more as the day is approaching. Did you see it? So what the author of Hebrews is saying is there's a connection. that if you want to hope for the long haul, if you want to hope and believe for more beyond 21 days, and you want to hope and believe for more even when things are not going your way, the key to doing it, it's doing it together. It's doing it in community. What does this community look like? Because, is it just us coming and singing some songs and listening to somebody talk for 20 minutes? What exactly does this kind of community look like? And I think verse 24 and 25 gives us the clues. I want to suggest two things. The kind of community that enables us to hold unswervingly to hope, to keep believing for more, is the kind of community that, one, spurs one another on towards love and good deeds. What does it mean to spur one another on towards love and good deeds? Spur, the word spur, it's referencing, anybody ride horses? Okay. Well, on the boots, there's the spur. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. Do you know what that spur does or how it's used? Neither do I. But the idea is that spur is used, right? The rider, what it would do is he or she would dig that spur into the side of the horse as a way to what? Motivate the horse. So if the horse is slowing down and you're losing the race, then what does the rider do? Dig the spur in a little bit. And then it motivates, it urges, it compels, it pushes forward. It reminds the horse, hey, you're not here just to go on a little stroll. You're here to actually win this race. So this idea, what the author of Hebrews is saying is we need to be a type of community that's not just coming around singing some kumbaya. We need to be, if we want to be a church that's believing for more love and more joy and more peace and more justice and more goodness and more flourishing in our world, in our communities around us, we've got to be a community that's actually spurring one another on, empowering each other, encouraging each other, motivating each other, sometimes giving ourselves a little kick and saying, hey, let's not forget the purpose of why we're here. Let's not forget and understand that we're not here just to feel good about ourselves, but we're here because we are called by God, that God has a purpose and a mission for the church, that we are to be a church that's actually for the common good, for the benefit and the flourishing of all people and all persons. And so sometimes we just need some reminders. And so what the author is saying is, if you're going to be that kind of church that's believing for more, especially when things are hard, then you've got to be the kind of church that's actually willing to spur one another on. That the believing for more is actually being willing to be the more. But we all understand that our natural proclivity and tendency is actually, you know what, we really don't want to be the more. We just want to be ourselves. And we want to do us and do me and you do you. But if we're really going to do this thing, then we've got to keep our vision in sight. We've got to understand that this is what we're called to, but this is also why we need community. Because we need to motivate and compel each other. And can I suggest, this time now more than ever is probably when we need to be spurring one another on towards love and good deeds. You know what's crazy? I was just thinking about this week. I thought loving and doing good deeds is kind of like common sense. I don't know. That's what I used to think. I used to think that was actually like a kind of a positive thing. Like if you were just to talk to anybody down the street, religious or not, and you're like, hey, what do you think is of value? Like, if we're going to live our lives of value, do you think loving people and doing good, are those good things? And I used to think that that's actually people would applaud that. But I think what's so interesting and fascinating is that nowadays, that doesn't necessarily garner applause. In fact, you can love more and love more radically and be more inclusive and do more good and care and have more compassion, but it'll get you called some names. In fact, did you all see what happened at the inaugural prayer? There was some controversy, and Bishop Marianne Buddy, she had the opportunity to offer a prayer, a homily, and at the end, I'm gonna read it for us really quick, in case you didn't catch it, because I think this was what was so mind blowing to me. So she reads this homily, and at the end of the homily, this is what she says. And the new president is obviously in attendance. This is part of the inauguration affairs, and this is what she says. She says, let me make one final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you, as you told the nation yesterday. You have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families, some who fear for their lives. The people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat it in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals. They may not be citizens or have proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes and are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches and mosques and synagogues and gurudaras and temples. I ask you to have mercy, Mr. President, on those in our communities whose children fear that their parents will be taken away, and that you help those who are fleeing war zones and persecution in their own lands to find compassion and welcome here. Our God teaches us that we are to be merciful to the stranger, for we were all once strangers in this land. May God grant us the strength and courage to honor the dignity of every human being, to speak the truth to one another in love, and to walk humbly with each other and our God for the good of all people, the good of all people in this nation and the world. Amen. Like, what a beautiful statement. And when I heard that, I was like, that's incredible. That's amazing. But what was so mind-blowing is the reaction. And this was the controversy. This is what goes to show that there were two very different forms of Christianity in our nation. Because the response by the administration and by other religious leaders were not one of embrace and not one of saying yes and amen, but it was one of saying, that was disrespectful. You owe me a... So here, it led to name calling. I won't say all the different names, but it led to names like demonic and satanic and how. It is mind-blowing, but then it's not mind-blowing because some of y'all know the journey of our church. Like, we got called all those names in the past year. But it's so fascinating to me that someone that just calls and advocates for mercy and compassion and love and care for other people, and especially those that Jesus calls us to love and care for the most, the least, and the last, the poor and the oppressed, are the very things that people actually are going to call you names for. Church, can I suggest that now more than ever, we're going to need to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. I know it might feel like there's a minority group of Christians, Christian nationalists who are filled by white supremacy with the belief that whiteness and white people and white straight cisgendered men are better than everybody else. And I guarantee you that while that might seem that is a minority, that's going to be in the public sphere for a very long time. That's going to be the primary voices that other people are going to be hearing. That's probably the primary voices that you're going to be hearing on a constant basis. And so if we're going to continue to have hope and believe that more is possible, that flourishing is still possible, even in the midst of what's happening right now in our administration, we're going to have to encourage one another. We're going to have to spur one another on towards love and good deeds. Because I guarantee you, there will be times and days where you're like, is it worth it? I just want to give up. And can I encourage us? Here's the one way that we can continue to spur one another on towards love and good deeds, is we can control what we do right here. See, one of the things that I think we could do if we want to be a kind of church that's actually spurring one another on love and good deeds is to actually demonstrate the kind of community that we believe God calls us to. And we could start right here. We might not be able to control all of the things and all of the places and situations, but we can be that inclusive, loving church right here where everybody belongs, where everybody is welcomed, where everybody is celebrated, where everybody has a seat at the table, where everybody has a voice, where everybody can be who it is that God has called them to be and to know that they are radically loved by God and radically loved by their family. And so my hope and my encouragement, church, is that we would be that kind of church, that we would do more together by being more together, that we would actually start by being the kinds of people that we believe that God is calling us to be. And then to be a church that at the end of the day is learning not just to spur one another on towards love and good deeds, but then to encourage each other, to affirm each other. The word encouragement in verse 25, it says this. The word for encouragement, it's not just this idea of challenging or compelling or motivating, but it's also this idea of comforting. It's this idea of consoling one another. And so I think if we're really going to be that kind of church, the kind of church that's going to be able to believe for more, we've got to be a church that's actually encouraging one another, that we're supporting one another, that we're listening to each other. You might not necessarily have all the feels, but the person sitting next to you might. What does it look like for us not just to be conscious and aware of the things and ways in which we are feeling in any given moment, but what does it look like for us to be a community that actually cares about how our neighbor is feeling? And how what others are experiencing, how the things that are happening around them are actually impacting them at a visceral level. And I think if we're going to be that kind of church, then we've got to be a church that's willing to be vulnerable, that's willing to be open to sharing and to talking about how it is that we're feeling and what it is that we're going through. And so I wonder, church, like for us, I think it's so easy to come to even a service like this, and we do the usual greeting because we have our little meet and greet as the kids are going to the rec room, and we're like, how you doing? And it's the usual, I'm good, I'm fine. And I wonder, maybe there's an invitation for us, and I want us to start thinking about what does it look like to create space for this to happen within our times together, where we're also really just checking in on each other. And so maybe the question that we start asking each other is actually not how are you doing, but maybe it's how are you feeling? How are you feeling this week? How are you feeling right now in this moment? And then to simply ask, well, what can I do to support you? What can I do to support you? Hebrews 10:23 through 25 says, let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day approaching. So that's my hope and my prayer for us, church. If we want to keep believing for more, I think we can do it, but we've got to understand the importance of doing it together, in community, as community. I want to close our time. We're going to do communion.